I'll go through the rules first. So rule 1 is stand up straight with your shoulders back. The reason to adopt it is not because it's a dominant stance. It's a competent stance. And competence tends to make you dominant, at least in hierarchies that are functioning properly. Because there are hierarchies, which is what I outline in chapter 1. I say the hierarchies are old. They're not socio-cultural constructions. They're not a secondary consequence of capitalism and the free market. All of that is absolute nonsense. It couldn't be more wrong. And as an indication of that, I point out that lobsters, whom we diverged from on the evolutionary front 1/3 billion years ago, have hierarchies, right? And that the neurochemical systems, the neurological systems that lobsters have that mediate their hierarchical status, run on the same chemical that the neurological systems that we use to mediate hierarchy run on. So that's just absolutely mind-boggling. And rule 2 is treat yourself like you're someone responsible for helping. And number 3, which is very tightly associated with number 2, they're sort of variations on a theme, is make friends with those people who want the best for you. And by the way, these last 2 rules aren't injunctions designed to make your life easier. They're actually injunctions designed to make your life more difficult, right? And so rule 2 and 3 are like that, because treat yourself as if you're someone responsible for helping isn't the same as be nice to yourself. It's not that. And to associate with people who want the best for you means that they get to demand the best from you. And that's also not an easy thing. Rule 4 is compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today. And that's an injunction about envy, right? It's easy. You need you need things that are above you, because you need to do something worthwhile with your life. You need something to aim at, but one of the consequences of that is that you can become envious of people that you believe have attained more in a deserved or undeserved manner, and that can make you bitter. And so it's much better to compare yourself to yourself and to use yourself as the target for improvement and comparison. Rule 5 is don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. And the rule of thumb there is if you dislike them, then other people will. And it's a bad idea to allow your children to act in a way that makes other children dislike them or adults dislike them, given that they're going to have to deal with children and they're going to have to deal with adults. So your primary responsibility as a parent is to help your child learn how to behave so that the social world opens up its arms to them and welcomes them at every level. And you've done your job if you can manage that, and it's not a simple thing to do. Rule 6 is put your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. And that's not take no action for others until you have your act together. That isn't what the rule means. It means that bind your ambition with humility and work on what's right in front of you that you will suffer for if you get wrong before you engage in the large-scale transformation of other people. Rule 7 is do what is meaningful and not what is expedient. And I would say in some sense that's the core ethos of the book. Not exactly, because rule 8, which is tell the truth or at least don't lie, is a necessary conjunction to that, or a necessary additional element, because I don't think that you can pursue what is meaningful without telling the truth. And the reason for that is if you don't tell the truth, or let's say if you lie, which is an easier way to think about it, you corrupt the mechanisms, the instinctual mechanisms that manifest themselves as meaning, and then you can't trust them. And that's a very bad idea. So the fundamental reason to not lie is because you corrupt your own perceptions if you lie. And when you corrupt your own perceptions, then you can't rely on yourself. And if you can't rely on yourself, then, well, good luck to you. Because what are you going to rely on in the absence of your own judgment? Rule 9, assume that the person that you're listening to knows something you don't. And that's not so much a mark of respect for the person, although it is that. It's a mark of recognition of your own unbearable ignorance. You know, one of the things you have to do in life, you have to decide what's more important. what you know or what you don't know. First of all, there's a lot of what you don't know. And so if you make friends with that, if you decide that's important, then, well, that's a good thing, because you're going to be surrounded by what you don't know your entire life. And so if you're appreciative of that, then that's going to make things go better for you. And if you're fortunate when you have a conversation with someone and you're actually interested in what they say, then even if they're not very good at communicating, even if they're awkward, or even if they display a certain amount of enmity towards you, there's always the possibility that they might tell you something you don't know, in which case you can walk away from the conversation less ignorant and corrupt than you were when you started the conversation. And if your life isn't everything that you would like it to be, then being slightly less ignorant and corrupt is probably a good thing. And so Rule 10 is be precise in your speech. And that's an observation, I would say, that's a variant of a New Testament injunction, which is, or maybe a description of the nature of the world, which is, knock and the door will open, and ask and you will receive. You don't get what you don't aim at. You might get what you do aim at. And your aim might get better as you aim as well, which is something to consider. Rule 11 is don't bother children when they're skateboarding. And that's actually a discussion of courage, of encouragement, more specifically, because I've been trying to understand, for example, what role parents play in the lives of their children. And I would say this is a role that is of fundamental importance, as well as attempting to guide your children so that they act in a socially desirable manner, so that the world opens itself up to them. You also want to encourage them, which is not the same as sheltering them. It's not the same at all. And to encourage someone is to say something like, or to act out something like, look, kid, the world's already difficult, because the world isn't easy for children any more than it's easy for adults. The difficulties are, they're not the same. They're child-sized difficulties, but they're still difficulties. The world is a very hard place, and it's a bitter place in many ways. And it's not only a hard and bitter place, it's also touched with betrayal and malevolence. And that's the fundamental bottom line. But there's something in you that is capable of taking that full on and transcending it. And that's encouragement. You say, well, as difficult as things are, you're up to the challenge. There's a rule of thumb, which I think is a good one, which I believe is often applied in nursing homes by people who work in nursing homes, which is, of course, a very difficult job. And the rule is, do not do anything for anyone they can do for themselves. So in Rule 12 is, pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. And it's oddly enough, a meditation on fragility. It's a discussion of what you do when you don't know what to do. And that's really when things have gone badly for you, when you face a terrible tragedy in your own personal life, or in your familial life, or perhaps even in the life of your community, when things come crowding in at you too quickly. In the case of a death in the family, or a terrible illness, or the collapse of a dream, or any of the things that can flip your world upside down, is how do you cope with that? And that chapter contains discussion of the necessity of narrowing your time frame, because sometimes the right way to look at the world is across years, and sometimes it's across months, and when things are more out of control, perhaps it's across days. And when things are when you're really up against the wall, it's across hours or even minutes. And during those minutes, then you concentrate on doing as well as you can with what's right in front of you for the longest unit of time that you can tolerate conceptualizing. Maybe that's what you do at someone's deathbed. And while you're doing that and suffering away madly, then you also take the time to appreciate everything you can that manifests itself, that allows itself to be appreciated. And so that's the metaphor of the cat, I suppose. And so that's the 12 rules. And I'll return to rule 1, which is stand up straight with your shoulders back. And I'm going to use it as a platform for laying out the abstractions that I talked to at the beginning of the lecture.